Please welcome the winners for Best International Feature Film, director of I'm Still Here, Walter Salles.
This time taking us all the way down to Brazil, where we've got a film, I'm Still Here. And it's really making a lot of noise, not just because it's, good cinema, but because of how it's impacting the country's whole social and political scene.
Yeah, it's really something how I'm Still Here kind of bridges Brazil's past and present. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It digs into that whole military dictatorship era, a time when people just vanished and there was all that political craziness. But it's speaking to what's going on in Brazil right now, too, especially with that whole rise of the far right thing.
I read somewhere that the film tells the true story, right, of Rubens Paiva, this politician who disappeared during the dictatorship. And the film actually got Brazil's Supreme Court to reopen his case. The film itself was a piece of evidence.
Crazy, right? It really shows how art can shine a light on stuff that's been buried for years, bring it back into the public eye. And the film was a hit both in Brazil and around the world. Over 4 million people saw it just in Brazil. And Fernanda Torres, who plays Paiva's wife, Eunice, she won Best Actress. So it's given the film a platform to start these super important conversations.
And don't forget, this is Brazil's first ever Oscar win for Best International Film, beating out some serious competition. But honestly, what's more interesting to me is how the film seems to be making Brazil face its past, the whole legacy of the dictatorship.
Totally. The film has reignited this whole debate about the 1979 amnesty law that basically protected people who were involved in the dictatorship's crimes from ever being prosecuted. Some see it as this necessary step to move on, heal the country, but for others it's a symbol that these guys got away with it, no accountability.
So you've got this law that's supposed to help the nation move forward, but it sounds like I'm Still Here is forcing everyone to ask, has that moving forward come at the cost of real justice?
Exactly, and that's where it gets even more relevant to what's happening in Brazil right now with people like former President Bolsonaro openly praising the military regime. It's scary to think that maybe democracy isn't as strong as we think, and that we could see history repeat itself.
And then when you think about how Bolsonaro was actually charged with trying to pull off a coup after he lost to Lula da Silva in 22, it's hard not to see the parallels.
The director, Walter Salles, said that he started the film back in 2016 to try to make sense of the past. But when the far right started gaining traction in 2017, things felt different. It was suddenly, I'm Still Here wasn't just about dealing with ghosts from the past. It was about understanding the stuff shaping Brazil today.
So for our listeners, we're talking about this movement on the far right of the political spectrum that's usually big on nationalism, social conservatism, and not so keen on globalization. And those are all themes that were around during the dictatorship, right?
Yeah, and it's almost like the film is asking, is all that coming back?
That's kind of a scary thought. So how does the film actually explore all these complicated themes?
It's all through Eunice Paiva's story, her relentless search for her husband. The film doesn't shy away from how brutal the dictatorship was, but it tells it through this personal lens, so it really hits you in the gut, makes it emotional.
And it's interesting that Fernanda Montenegro, who's Torres' mom in real life, plays the older Eunice in the film. That must have added a whole other level of depth and emotion to the performance.
Oh, absolutely. It's the film blurs the lines between what's real and what's not, adds this extra layer to an already powerful story.
This feels like one of those films that stays with you long after you've seen it. It's not just entertainment. It's like an invitation to think about tough questions, truth, justice, the whole legacy of the past.
And the fact that it came out right when the far right was gaining ground and we were seeing these echoes of authoritarianism, it just makes its impact even bigger. It's become a focal point for discussions about what kind of future Brazil wants.
It makes you wonder how a film, a work of fiction based on true stuff, can have such a deep effect on a whole nation.
I think it just shows how powerful storytelling can be when it's done right. Stories connect us to history, make us feel empathy, and challenge how we see the world,
Yeah, for sure. It really does feel like I'm Still Here has tapped into something deep, in the Brazilian soul, this collective need for truth and accountability that's been simmering there for decades.
And the film has given a voice to that need in such a powerful way, both artistically and personally. It's not just about facts and figures, it's about how it feels to live with these unanswered questions with the weight of history on your shoulders.
You mentioned earlier that the film sparked this whole debate about the 1979 amnesty law. Can you give us a bit more context about this law, why it's such a hot topic now?
Sure. I think so. The amnesty law came about when Brazil was transitioning back to democracy. It was meant to be this gesture of reconciliation. It pardoned both people who committed crimes for the regime and those who fought against it.
So like a clean slate for everyone involved trying to move on from this really tough chapter.
Exactly. But the problem is it also meant that a lot of people who did some really terrible things during the dictatorship were never held accountable for their actions. So it left a lot of victims and their families feeling like they never got justice, like the truth was swept under the rug.
And that's where the film comes in, right? Bringing these unresolved issues back to light, making people face these tough questions about forgiveness and accountability.
You get it. I'm still here. Isn't saying we need revenge or anything like that, but it asks, can we really have reconciliation without acknowledging the full extent of the damage that was done? You know, it's starting a national conversation about what justice even means when you've got this painful and divisive past.
We talked about how well received the film was, but I'm guessing not everyone was happy about it. What was the reaction like from the Bolsonaro supporters and those who were pro-military regime?
You're right, the response wasn't all sunshine and roses. Some of Bolsonaro's supporters wanted to boycott the film. They saw it as this politically motivated attack on their beliefs. You know, they felt like the film digging up the dark side of the dictatorship was trying to rewrite history and demonize a time that they saw as good for the country, all about order and stability.
It's like a film just like existing challenged their whole narrative, you know, made it impossible for them to ignore these uncomfortable truths.
Exactly. Their reaction just proves how powerful art can be. You know, it can disrupt the status quo and make people question their deeply held beliefs. Even if they hated the film's message, they couldn't deny that it was having a huge impact on the national conversation.
And on the flip side, you had those who were really moved by the film, connected with it on a personal level.
Absolutely. There were stories of people visiting the places where they filmed, paying their respects at Eunice Paiva's grave, having these really passionate discussions about what the film was all about. It became this cultural touchstone, you know, for people trying to make sense of their own family histories and the legacy of the dictatorship.
One of the most powerful moments for me was when Lula, in his speech after that attempted coup by Bolsonaro's supporters, used the film's title. He said, "If we are still here, it is because democracy has won."
It's amazing how those three words, "I'm still here," took on this whole new meaning in that moment. You know, they became a symbol of resilience, a way of saying, we're not giving up to those who wanted to destroy democracy.
It's like the film gave him the perfect phrase to sum up that moment. The whole idea that democracy is fragile, the threat of authoritarianism, and this determination to resist those forces. All of that was in both the film and Lula's speech.
It really shows how a film can go beyond the screen and become part of this national conversation. It's not just entertainment anymore. It's this cultural artifact that reflects and shapes the political landscape in Brazil.
So to bring it back to our listeners, why should someone who maybe doesn't have any connection to Brazil care about this film and all the debate it's causing?
I think I'm Still Here teaches us a lot about how the past never really goes away, and how important it is to face the truth even when it's hard. You know, it shows how art can be a catalyst for change, a way to deal with trauma, and a tool for promoting dialogue and understanding. Those are things everyone can relate to no matter where they're from or what their background is.
You mentioned before that the film came out around the same time the far right was gaining ground, not just in Brazil, but around the world. Do you think that's just a coincidence?
I think it's pretty clear that we're seeing a comeback of authoritarianism and nationalism in a lot of places these days, and often these movements try to romanticize the past, you know, ignoring or downplaying the bad stuff.
So I'm Still Here is like this counter-narrative, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked and why it's so important to learn from history.
Exactly. It encourages us to think critically, to have empathy, and to be willing to have these tough conversations about the past and how it affects us today. Those are essential qualities for any society, no matter what their political system is or what their history looks like.
It feels like we've gone on this huge journey with this deep dive. You know, we started with a film winning an Oscar and ended up talking about the whole connection between art history and politics in Brazil. It's wild.
And what's amazing is how I'm Still Here manages to be both super specific to Brazil, but also relatable to everyone. You know what I mean? It's about one family's search for the truth, but it also speaks to these bigger ideas like justice, memory, the power of stories.
So we've talked about how the film has made people in Brazil think and debate. But what about people watching around the world? What do you think they take away from this story?
I think it gives people a glimpse into a time in history that they might not know much about. You know, it shows the human cost of what happens when you have a dictatorship and the scars it leaves on people, families, whole societies.
And it's a good reminder that these things don't just stay in the past, like we were saying.
Yeah.
The fact that the far right is getting stronger these days shows that what led to the dictatorship in Brazil is still happening in other places today.
Yeah, and the film is like a wake-up call, you know?
Right.
It's telling us to pay attention to the signs of authoritarianism and to stand up for democracy when it's under threat.
It's definitely a powerful reminder that history can repeat itself if we don't learn from it, but it's also a story about resilience and hope. Eunice Paiva never stopped looking for her husband, and her determination ended up being part of this bigger push for truth and justice.
And that's the message I really hope stays with people after watching I'm Still Here.
Yeah.
It's a film that encourages us to face hard truths, to fight for what we believe in, and to never forget how much injustice can hurt.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what stands out to you listening right now? What has Exploring I'm Still Here and its impact on Brazil made you think about?
You know, I'm always blown away by how art can break down barriers and connect with people on such a deep emotional level. I'm Still Here is a perfect example of how a film can get people talking, challenge what they think, and inspire them to do something about it. It just shows the power of stories and why it's so important to experience art that makes us think critically about the world.
It makes me think about all the other stories that are out there waiting to be told, stories that can move us, teach us, and make us want to change things.
And it reminds us that we all have a part to play in shaping the stories that define our societies. You know, whether it's supporting artists having thoughtful conversations or speaking out against injustice, we can all help create a world where stories like I'm Still Here can change hearts and minds.
So the next time you come across a piece of art that really gets to you, something that makes you question what you thought you knew or lights a fire inside, you don't let that feeling go away. Embrace it, explore it, see where it takes you. You never know. You might just become part of the next wave of change makers inspired by the power of a story well told. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.